Most players experience a plateau in their playing level because they stop working on the fundamentals. The fundamentals of playing are things that we all learn as beginners. Things like the bow hold, placing the fingers, shifting, vibrato, etc. But most players seem to think that after they've learned these things, that they can then move on to other more advanced things, and that you just need to be good enough in order to get to a high level. When in reality, it's often things like your bow hold or the way that you're placing your fingers that are holding you back from reaching a higher level. And the great players all had mastery of these fundamentals, or at least mastery enough to reach a high level. Before we get into more, I'm David. I'm playing the violin for over 20 years, teaching for over 10, and posting tutorials online for the past 8 years. I myself experienced a major plateau in my playing, and even though I worked very hard, I wasn't able to get past it. That was until I discovered the Dounis Method. As someone who has at most an average level of talent, I thought that the secret to getting good was focusing on learning all the things that the great players would teach. These are things like practicing scales, finger exercises, etudes, and practicing everything very slowly. I thought that doing all those things would improve my playing. But after practicing those things for hours and hours a day, for years on end, I noticed that my playing wasn't actually really improving all that much. I noticed that the things that felt difficult for me a few years ago still felt pretty difficult, even though I'd been practicing them. But the problem was that I wasn't actually practicing the fundamentals that were involved. You see, oftentimes great players will teach their students to do things that they do because they already have an intuitive understanding of how to do the fundamentals. A great player has maybe never had someone actually teach them how fast playing works, because it's all intuitive to them. They don't focus on emphasizing every note. They know how to impulse and release when playing fast. That's why when they practice slow, it's not a big deal if they practice the passage slow and speed it up. But an average player like myself doesn't have that same intuition. With slow practice, for example, if I practice something slowly and then I try to gradually speed it up, I had no idea that I was actually supposed to release impulses and not emphasize every note the same. And similarly, with the technique that's involved, I didn't understand how fast left-hand technique worked or fast bow technique. These were all fundamentals that I had never really mastered, and I was trying to advance my playing without addressing them. That was until I discovered the Dounis Method. And Dounis Method goes over all of this. After a couple months of studying the Dounis Method, I noticed an incredible jump in my playing. I was starting to notice that I wasn't getting tense when playing fast or vibrating, and that all of a sudden my sound was better, and even my bow hold felt more comfortable. All these things are related. You see, when you have an understanding on how the fundamentals work and the mechanics behind them, it becomes easy to improve them. The Dounis Method provides lots of exercises for each of these, so I had plenty of things to try when I was trying to improve my fundamentals. But the great thing is that as you improve your fundamentals, you'll notice that your playing actually becomes more expressive. That's a natural byproduct. As I noticed the tension going away from my vibrato after years of struggling with that, I noticed that my playing also sounded more expressive. And when I understood the technique behind how fast bow strokes actually work, fast playing actually became enjoyable. And I noticed that I was able to play more expressive when playing fast. But the thing is that most players never reach this realization. A lot of players simply don't understand that they have to work on the fundamentals or how to work on them to reach a high level. But a lot of teachers and players work on these fundamentals in ways that seem pretty circular. You see, they'll take a fundamental like shifting, and to work on it, they'll do scales, but without actually addressing the mechanics behind the shift. They'll do these things over and over again, and maybe at different tempos, thinking that repetition is going to help. But without addressing the mechanics behind them, they'll find that their technique won't actually improve all that much. That's unless they have an intuitive understanding of how it works. But most players don't. That's why it's so important to actually understand the mechanics of how things work. And for all these fundamentals, like vibrato, the mechanics aren't actually all that complicated once you've had them explained to you. Let's take the vibrato for instance. The vibrato is made up of two main motions, a rubbing motion and a rotation motion of the finger. When you understand how to work on these motions, you'll immediately learn how to make your vibrato more comfortable. But actually, that's not all that's involved. You see, you also need to learn how to keep your finger balanced, how to release the impulse of the vibrato, and how to make sure that you can comfortably vibrate at all parts of the fingerboard. Now, while there are a lot of details to fundamentals like the vibrato, none of them are actually all that complicated, but you just have to know them when you're practicing. You see, if you understand that the reason your vibrato is tense is because you're not releasing the impulse, you can just practice a couple exercises to teach you how to release the impulse, like the pizzicato exercise. Then you'll notice that your vibrato has improved and that your passage sounds more expressive. But without knowing all these things, it kind of feels like you're trying to assemble something without having the right set of instructions or tools. That's the difference that I see in my playing now. Looking back, I had great work ethic, but I simply didn't know how to improve the things that I wanted to improve. But now, after 10 plus years of studying the Dounis Method, all of this has become crystal clear. And it's not just the mechanical aspects of playing, it's also the expressive aspects. My playing now is completely different than my playing was 10 plus years ago. And the crazy thing is that oftentimes I'm practicing a fraction of the amount that I used to. You see, if I want to study a piece like the Paganini's 24th Caprice, I used to spend 5+ hours a day practicing that without reaching the results that I do now. And now I can spend an hour or less working on a piece that difficult and get much better results, simply because I know how the fundamentals work. If you're someone that relates to any of the things I said, it's probably because you also have experienced this in your playing. And maybe you get frustrated when you practice for long periods and don't get the improvement that you expect. That's normal. So what's the best way to go about fixing this? Start by taking just 1 or 2 fundamentals a week and learning the mechanics behind how those motions work. If you take something like big shifts, for example, which I made a video on, you can learn how the mechanics of the motion work and then take that and practice it in the piece that you're working on. You'll notice that when you actually understand how the mechanics work, your practice becomes a lot more efficient and you can get much more done in the same amount of time. If you're interested in learning more on mastering the fundamentals using your natural instincts, check out some of the resources below, including my free ebook.